Maya let out a long, slow breath, the kind that felt like it had been stuck in her chest for years. The screen of her laptop glowed in the dim light of the cabin, finally showing the words, Project Final Approval. It was done. 6 months ago, she had packed her car, loaded up her 2 dogs, and driven away from the city, from the constant buzz of deadlines and a feeling that she was always running on empty. This little cabin in the pine woods, with its creaky floors and stone fireplace, was supposed to be her cure. The first few weeks were all about the silence. Not the empty silence of her old apartment, but a living, breathing quiet filled with the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the gentle snoring of Kodiak, her Newfoundland. He was a giant black bear of a dog, with a heart as soft as his fur. Where Kodiak was calm strength, Bean, her border collie mix, was lively intelligence. Bean was always thinking, watching, her eyes missing nothing, her ears tuned to frequencies Maya couldn't hear. Their new life fell into a simple, comforting rhythm. Mornings were for coffee on the porch. Days were for work at the big wooden table by the window, with the dogs napping at her feet. Evenings were for long walks down the dirt road, the 3 of them against a backdrop of towering trees and a sky that turned brilliant, shades of orange and purple dot. It was during these quiet evenings that their new ritual began. As the sun started to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in deep blues and grays, the dogs would wander over to the large, worn rug in front of the big picture window. Kodiak would heave a great sigh and plop down, his bulk covering half the rug. Bean would sit neatly beside him, back straight, ears pricked forward. Together, they would stare out into the growing darkness of the forest. Maya noticed it one night while washing dishes. She looked over and saw them there, 2 silent statues outlined by the fading light. She smiled. On watch again, guys? She said, her voice soft in the quiet cabin. Kodiak's tail gave a single heavy thump against the floor. Bean didn't move a muscle, her gaze fixed on a point deep in the woods. Maya dried her hands and walked over, kneeling between them. She looked out, trying to see what they saw. She saw the dark shapes of the pines, the shimmer of a few early fireflies, the gentle sway of branches in the evening breeze. Nothing out of the ordinary. What is it? She whispered, rubbing Kodiak's broad head. Squirrel? A deer? Maybe a raccoon? To her, it was a game. They were country dogs now, with a whole forest of creatures to watch over. She found it deeply comforting. In the city, every strange noise was a threat. Here, with her 2 loyal friends on guard, the vast, dark woods felt less lonely. It felt safe. She started calling it their evening watch, a part of their new, peaceful routine. She'd sometimes join them, sitting on the rug with her back against the sofa, a book in her lap. She wouldn't really read, though. She'd just sit in the quiet with them, listening to their breathing, watching the stars begin to poke through the black velvet of the sky. It was in these moments she felt most at peace. The tiredness that had clung to her for so long was finally starting to loosen its grip. One weekend, her friend from the city came to visit. As dusk fell, the dogs took their usual places. Her friend laughed. Will you look at that? They're like 2 little soldiers. I know, Maya said, pouring 2 cups of tea. It's their thing. Every night, like clockwork. My personal security detail. It's cute, her friend said. But what are they even looking at? There's nothing out there. Maya glanced at the window. Bean had tilted her head, listening to something. A second later, a faint rustle came from the bushes near the woodpile. Bean's body tensed, but she didn't bark. Kodiak let out a low, soft woof. There was more a rumble in his chest than a sound. See? Maya said. Probably just a little animal. They're on the job. She believed it completely. It was a story she told herself that made the wilderness feel cozy and controlled. Her dogs were playing a role in the story of her peaceful new life. They were her watchful companions, guarding their cozy castle from the harmless mysteries of the night. She had no reason, not yet, to think the story might be wrong. The watch was a game, the woods were friendly, and the deep, focused silence of her dogs was just part of the charm of their new home. The peace felt real, and for now, that was enough. The comfortable feeling of the evening watch started to change. It was a slow shift, like the gradual turning of the seasons, so subtle at first that Maya almost didn't notice. But the dogs noticed. Their game was becoming something else, Dot. It began with the timing. Their watch used to start as the last bit of sun disappeared. Now, Bean would often get up from her nap in the late afternoon, stretch, and go to her spot by the window while the sky was still pale blue. Kodiak would soon follow, his big body blocking the light. They weren't waiting for dusk anymore. They were preparing for it. The quality of their attention changed too. Before, they would lie there relaxed, their eyes casually scanning. Now, there was a tightness in their bodies. Bean sat so still she seemed to be carved from stone. Her ears, usually swiveling to catch every sound, were pinned forward, locked onto the tree line. Kodiak didn't rest his heavy head on his paws anymore. He held it up, his nose working the air, his deep brown eyes wide and unblinking. The silence was the most unsettling part. The little grunts and sighs were gone. The room, during their watch, became utterly quiet, except for the low crackle of the fire. It was a listening silence. It made Maya stop what she was doing and listen too. One evening, she was trying to focus on sketching a logo. The only sound was the scratch of her pencil. Then, from outside, there was a sharp crack, the sound of a dry branch breaking under a heavy foot. It wasn't a small sound. It echoed in the quiet woods. Dot in an instant. Both dogs were on their feet. It was so fast it made Maya jump. Kodiak's head was low, and a sound came from him that she had never heard in all his gentle life. It was a growl, but not like the playful rumble he made when tugging a rope. This was a deep, rolling vibration that seemed to start in the ground and come up through his massive chest. It was a sound of pure warning that filled the whole cabin. Dot. At the same moment, Bean exploded. She launched herself at the window, her barking a sharp, frantic, piercing alarm. It wasn't her usual, "Hey, something's there," bark. It was a continuous, desperate volley. The fur along her spine stood straight up, making her look twice her size. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She dropped her pencil and hurried to the window, pressing her face close to the cold glass. Her hands cupped around her eyes to block the indoor light. She peered into the deep blue gloom of the forest. She saw the familiar shapes of the pine trees, dark against the slightly lighter sky. She saw the shadowy lump of the old woodpile. She saw nothing moving, nothing out of place. "Hey, it's okay," she said, her voice sounding shaky. "It's probably just a deer, you guys. Or maybe that big raccoon we saw last week." The dogs did not listen. Kodiak's growl continued, a steady, threatening engine. Bean kept barking, now darting to the front door and back to the window. Maya flicked on the outside porch light. The sudden yellow glow flooded the small clearing in front of the cabin, turning the woods beyond into an even darker wall. Nothing stirred. After a full minute, Bean's barking slowed to whines. Kodiak finally closed his mouth, but he remained standing, tense, staring into the spot where the sound had come from. Maya took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "See? Nothing there." She said it more for herself than for them. She walked to the door, turned the lock with a firm, loud click, and drew the thick curtain across the big window. The action seemed to break the spell. Bean finally lay down, though her body was still twitchy. Kodiak heaved a sigh and settled, but his eyes stayed fixed on the curtain. At night, for the first time, Maya checked all the window latches before going to bed. She listened to the wind in the trees, a sound that used to be soothing. Now, every gust that shook the branches, every creak of the old cabin's timber, made her think of that sudden, sharp crack. The next day, in the clear light of morning, the fear felt silly. The woods were full of noises. It was likely a deer or a bear ambling through. Her dogs were just doing their job, taking their guarding duties a little too seriously. They were protecting their home from wild animals. That was a good thing, but a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. The way they had reacted, it wasn't the way they reacted to the scent of a squirrel or the sight of a turkey. That had been a chorus of excitement. This was different. This had been a unified, serious alarm. A reaction to something they perceived as a genuine threat. She tried to shake the feeling. She took them for an extra long walk, laughing as Bean chased Leaves and Kodiak plodded happily along. The forest was beautiful and calm. Her home was safe. Yet, when the afternoon sun began to slant through the trees, casting long shadows across the floor, she saw Bean lift her head from her bed. The dog looked at the window, then at Maya, then back at the window. Without a sound, she got up and walked to her post on the rug. A few minutes later, Kodiak joined her. The watch had begun earlier than ever. And this time, Maya didn't smile at their cute routine. She watched them watching the woods, and for the first time, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air crept down her spine. They weren't just looking. They were waiting, and she was starting to wonder what for. The days began to feel different. It was as if the air in the cabin had become slightly heavier, a quiet tension that hummed just below the surface of everyday life. The dogs were the source of it. Their watch was no longer a part of the evening. It was the main event, and it was starting earlier and lasting longer. Maya found herself watching them more than she watched the woods. She noticed how Bean's nose would sometimes twitch, sampling the breeze that slipped through the window frame. She saw how Kodiak's eyes, usually soft and sleepy, were now constantly moving, scanning the same patch of trees with a soldier's focus. She started timing her own chores around their silent vigil, feeling a strange reluctance to be in the bedroom or the shower when they were on duty. The peace she had come here to find was being eaten away, bit by bit, by their unwavering suspicion. She needed a reason, something to explain it all away. To put her mind at rest, she got her chance on a crisp Thursday afternoon. She needed groceries and a new sketch pad. The drive to the small town was 20 minutes of winding road, and she always felt a little lift in her spirits when she saw the handful of shops. Today, that lift was stronger. It was a reminder of normal people and normal life, away from the strange. Watchful silence of the cabin, she did her shopping, chatted briefly with the woman at the hardware store about the best firewood, and started the drive back, feeling more settled. As she turned onto the long gravel road that led to her cabin, she saw a figure up ahead, near her mailbox. She slowed the car. It was a man. He was dressed in worn, faded camouflage pants and a heavy jacket. He wasn't looking at the mailbox, though. He had a large, unfolded map in his hands and seemed to be studying it intensely, then looking up at the trees, then back at the map. As her car got closer, he turned. He had a plain face, neither old nor young, with a short beard. He gave a small, polite smile and a wave, like someone who was just lost. Maya gave a brief, hesitant wave back and pulled past him, up her driveway. In her rearview mirror, she watched him. He folded his map, took one last look toward her cabin, and then walked casually back into the thick cover of the pines, not down the road toward another house. A hunter, she said out loud to the empty car. The word felt solid and reassuring. Of course. It was hunting season, or getting close to it. The man was just scouting the area, looking for deer trails. It made perfect sense. The dogs, with their super-sensitive hearing and smell, had probably been detecting his movements in the woods for weeks. Their behavior wasn't about a mysterious threat. It was about a perfectly normal human activity happening nearby. A wave of relief washed over her. She carried the groceries inside, the explanation playing happily in her mind. The dogs greeted her, tails wagging, but as she put the food away, she saw Bean wander to the window. The dog's tail slowly stopped wagging. Her body posture shifted into that familiar, alert stance. "It's just a hunter, Bean," Maya said, her voice cheerful. "Nothing to worry about." But that night, the theory crumbled. If the man was just a hunter lost in the woods, why did the dog's behavior get worse? They became frantic. They wouldn't settle on their rug. Instead, they paced. Kodiak would go to the front door, sniff along the bottom, and whine. Bean would follow him to the back door, scratch at it once, then race back to the front window. They were a duo of pure, restless anxiety. The friendly, lost hunter from the afternoon did not match the energy in her cabin. This energy was fear. Her own relief melted away, replaced by a cold, sinking feeling. She tried to watch a movie, but the sounds from the television felt like an insult to the dog's serious silence. She finally turned it off. The silence was worse. In the quiet, she could hear them pacing. The soft click-click of Bean's nails on the hardwood. The heavy thud of Kodiak's pads. Back and forth. It was driving her crazy. Finally, she grabbed her phone. She needed an authority, someone to tell her she was being silly. She found the number for the local ranger station. A man answered, his voice tired but friendly. "Hi," Maya said, trying to sound more calm than she felt. "I live out on the old pine road, past the creek. I'm just calling because, well, my dogs have been acting really strange for a couple weeks. Really alert, barking at the woods. And today I saw a man in camo out by the road with a map." The ranger listened. "Hum," he said. "What did he do?" "Nothing, really." He waved. He walked into the woods. "Sounds like a hunter to me," the ranger said, echoing her own earlier thoughts. "We get a lot of 'em out there. Season's coming up. They're all scouting their spots. But my dogs, they're acting so scared. It's intense." The ranger made a sympathetic sound. "Dogs have good instincts. Better than ours. They probably hear him or smell him moving around out there, and they don't know what to make of it. They're protecting their territory. It's natural. So you think it's nothing?" Maya asked, wanting desperately to believe him. "I'd say it's almost certainly nothing," the ranger said. "Just keep your doors locked, which I'm sure you do anyway. It's a safe area. Probably just a guy who's a little turned around." She thanked him and hung up. His words were sensible. They were the words of someone who knew these woods. She repeated them to herself. "It's almost certainly nothing." She looked at her dogs. Kodiak had stopped pacing. He was standing in the middle of the living room, staring right at her. In the dim light, his eyes seemed to hold a question. Bean sat at his side, looking from the dog to Maya and back again. They were waiting for her to understand. The ranger's explanation was logical, but it sat in her stomach like a stone. It didn't fit. The man hadn't looked lost. He had looked placed. And the dogs? Their fear wasn't about a distant noise. It was focused, immediate. It was about the space just outside the walls of their home. She locked the doors, checked the windows again, and went to bed. Sleep was thin and brittle. Every little noise from the forest was now a footstep. The comforting story of the lost hunter was gone. In its place was a blank space, a question mark that her dogs had been trying to fill for her all along. They weren't confused by a normal noise. They were trying to warn her about something specific. and she was only just beginning to listen. The calm after the phone call to the ranger didn't last. It was a thin blanket, and the cold fear underneath it quickly seeped back through. The dog's behavior was the true weather vane, and it pointed only toward Storm Dot. Their watch became a constant, quiet siege. They no longer waited for afternoon. Now, if Maya was home, they were on duty. She'd be making lunch, and Bean would be sitting by the back door, ear cocked. She'd be reading, and Kodiak would be a silent, dark mound in front of the main window, his head up, watching. The friendly, playful energy they used to have seemed drained away, replaced by a job that consumed them. Maya felt a pang of guilt, as if her presence in this cabin had drafted them into a war she couldn't see. The week dragged on, each day a little shorter, each night a little longer and more profound in its silence. Then the storm was forecast. Not just any storm, but a big autumn gale, the kind that rolls in from the mountains with a promise of violence. The news said to expect high winds and possible power outages. Maya spent the afternoon securing things outside, battening down hatches. The dogs followed her every step, not playfully, but like wary bodyguards. As the first thick cloud smothered the sunset, the wind arrived. It started as a moan in the high pines, then grew to a roar that shook the windows. The trees swayed and danced like frantic shadows. Just as she was lighting the big kerosene lamp, the world outside the windows went black. The power, with a soft pop from the kitchen, was gone. The sudden absence of the familiar hum of the refrigerator was startling. Now, the only sounds were the fury of the wind and the frantic tapping of branches against the roof. The inside of the cabin was a cave of dancing shadows, pushed and pulled by the flame of the lamp. In this unstable world of dark and light, the dogs snapped into a state of pure purpose. They did not go to their rug. They went to the front door. Together, Kodiak planted himself directly in front of it, a living barricade. Bean stood beside him, her body rigid, a low, continuous growl vibrating in her throat that Maya could feel in the floorboards. This was different from their watch. This was a defensive line. Maya's mouth went dry. She held the lamp up, its light throwing wild shapes on the walls. "It's just the storm, guys," she whispered, but the words were eaten by the wind. They didn't even glance at her. Their entire beings were focused on the door and the chaotic night beyond it. Then she saw it, a light, a stark white beam that cut through the storm arc. It wasn't lightning. Lightning flashed and died. This beam swept slowly, deliberately, across the big picture window left to right, like someone was painting the glass with it. Her breath caught. A jolt of pure electricity shot down her spine. Someone was out there. The beam vanished. The world was dark and roaring again. Maya stood frozen, the lamp trembling in her hand. The dogs were silent now, a terrible, waiting silence. She set the lamp down on the table, her movements slow and careful. On her hands and knees, she crawled to the side window, the one that looked out toward the woodpile. She carefully peeled back the very edge of the curtain, with one finger at first. She saw only the violent swirl of leaves and rain. Then a shape resolved itself from the gloom. It was a man, standing perfectly still, not 20 feet from the house. He was just beyond the circle of where the porch light would have been, had there been power. He wore dark, wet clothing. He wasn't moving. He was simply standing, facing the cabin. The rain streamed off him, but he didn't seem to notice it was the man from the road. The hunter. But he wasn't hunting deer. He wasn't lost. He wasn't looking at a map. He was looking at her home, got every piece of the last few weeks slammed together in that single, horrifying moment. The evening watch wasn't a game. The intense focus wasn't about animals. The frantic pacing wasn't confusion. It was a long-sustained warning. Her dogs had known. They had sensed his lingering presence, his circling, his interest long before her own mind would allow her to believe it. They had tried to tell her with their bodies, their barks, their unwavering vigil. They had been protecting her from him. A cold, sure understanding washed over her, colder than the rain outside. This was no coincidence. He knew she lived here alone. He had been watching. And now, in the cover of the storm's chaos, with the power out and the world reduced to noise and shadow, he had come closer. Why was he just standing there? The question was more terrifying than if he had been trying to break in. He was waiting, listening, or maybe he was enjoying the fear he knew he was causing. From the front door, Kodiak's growl started again, deeper and more menacing than ever, a sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Bean let out a single, sharp warning bark. The man outside heard it. His head turned, just slightly, toward the sound of the dogs. Maya saw the pale gleam of his face in the dark. He didn't run. He didn't startle. He just slowly turned his head back, facing the dark cabin once more. He wasn't afraid of the dogs. The realization was a new kind of terror. He had heard them for weeks. He knew they were there. And he had come anyway. Maya lowered the curtain, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. She slid down the wall, sitting on the floor, her back against the solid wood. She could hear the wind, the rain, and the deep, primordial growl of her giant dog. She was trapped in a dark box with the storm on one side and a silent, waiting stranger on the other. The peaceful refuge had vanished. The dogs had been right all along. And now she was finally listening. The floor was cold beneath her, but Maya couldn't feel it. All she could feel was the hammering of her own heart and the cold, solid understanding that now filled her. The man was outside. Her dogs had known. And she was alone. From the front door came a sound that broke through her frozen fear. It was the scrape of claws on wood. Not a frantic scratch, but a slow, deliberate drag. Then a low, wet sniffing sound. He was right there, on the other side of the door. Listening, a new sound joined the storm. A soft metallic jiggle. The handle of the back door. Someone was testing it, turning it slowly, feeling for weakness. The noise acted like a spark to gunpowder inside the cabin. Kodiak's deep growl erupted into a full, thunderous roar. It was a sound of raw power, a bear warning that shook the window panes. At the same moment, Bean threw herself at the front door, not barking, but screaming a high, shrill, continuous alarm that was pure canine fury. The sudden explosion of noise from inside the cabin was shocking. Even to Maya, the jiggling at the back door stopped. In the brief silence that followed, filled only by the dog's rage, Maya's mind cleared. This was her home. These were her defenders. She was not just a victim in the dark. She pushed herself up from the floor. Adrenaline burned through the cold fear. She was not going to wait. She had to fight back with the only weapon she had right now, noise and the illusion of control. She ran to the heavy cast-iron pan sitting on her wood stove. She grabbed it, and with all her strength, she slammed it against the thick metal body of the stove. Asterisk, asterisk, clang. Asterisk, asterisk. The sound was immense, a deafening gong that cut through the dog's barking and the storm. She screamed, not a scream of fear, but of furious defiance. "I've called the sheriff. They're on their way." She didn't know if her voice was steady, but she made it loud. She banged the pan against the stove again. Asterisk, asterisk, clang. Asterisk, asterisk. They have your description. They're coming now. She shouted, moving towards the front window. She banged the pan against the wall. Asterisk, asterisk, clang. Bean was a whirlwind of noise at the door. Kodiak's roar was unending, a promise of violence if that door opened. Maya kept shouting, her voice mixing with the metallic crashes and the primal sounds of her dogs. The cabin was no longer a quiet, vulnerable box. It was a fortress roaring with terrifying life. She dared another look out the side window. The man was no longer standing still. He was moving, but not towards the cabin. He was backing away, his shape clumsy in the rain. He stumbled over a root, righted himself, and then turned. The beam of his flashlight flicked on, swinging wildly, erratically, as he crashed through the underbrush, away from the house, back toward the road. The light soon disappeared, swallowed by the slashing rain and the trees. Maya stood, the heavy pan hanging from her hand, her chest heaving. The dogs fell silent almost at once. Bean let out a final, defiant huff at the door. Kodiak gave one last, low grumble, then sniffed deeply at the door seam. He turned and looked at her, his tongue lolling out. The job was done. She slid to the floor again, but now the tears came. They were tears of shock, of released terror, and of a profound, overwhelming gratitude. She opened her arms, and both dogs came to her, pushing their wet noses against her, licking her face. She buried her hands in Kodiak's thick, damp fur and held onto Bean's sturdy little body. They whined softly, their energy shifting from protectors to comforters. It was over an hour before headlights cut through the rain. The sheriff had gotten her message when the cell service flickered back on. 2 deputies, in slick yellow raincoats, walked the property with strong flashlights. They found deep boot prints in the mud under the windows. They found clear marks where someone had tried to force the latch on the back door. One of them pointed out how the person had stood for a long time in one spot, looking in. "Looks like your dog scared him off good," the older deputy said, giving Kodiak a respectful pat on the head. Kodiak accepted it calmly. "We've had some reports of a fellow trespassing, checking out empty seasonal cabins. Poacher, maybe. Or just a thief. You did the right thing, making all that noise. He wanted an easy target. You proved you weren't it." They took notes, promised to patrol the area, and left. The next morning was clear and brilliant, the world washed clean. The storm was gone, and with it, the terrible tension that had lived in the cabin for weeks. Maya made coffee and sat on the porch steps. The dogs lay beside her in patches of sun. Bean was chewing contentedly on a stick. Kodiak was already snoring, his giant paws twitching in a dream. They were not on watch. Maya sipped her coffee, watching the leaves fall in the gentle breeze. The woods were just woods again, beautiful, peaceful, full of harmless life. But the peace she felt now was different from the peace she had come here to find. That old peace had been fragile, built on not knowing. This new peace was solid. It was earned. It was shared. She looked at her dogs, their trusting faces turned toward the sun. They weren't just pets who happened to bark. They were a team. Bean, the early warning system, the sharp-eyed lookout. Kodiak, the final, immovable barrier, the source of ultimate strength. They had seen the truth long before she had let herself see it. They had spoken a language of growls and postures and unwavering vigilance. And when the moment came, they had given her the courage to find her own voice, to bang the pan and shout into the dark. She reached out and rested a hand on each of them. The city burnout she had been was gone. In her place was someone who understood the weight of a quiet forest, the value of a locked door, and the incredible silent loyalty lying on a rug at her feet. They had never been playing a game. They had been keeping a promise. And as the warm sun soaked into the 3 of them for the first time, she felt truly and completely safe.